And we're go.
Recording in progress.
Okay, so we were having technical difficulties on Clubhouse, and we're moving the conversation that we were having here, and it goes into what Sandman taught me about procrastination and what Netflix taught me about procrastination, and introducing Dr. Strix-Toledo, like what you do in acceleration and emotions around why we procrastinate.
Since we're here, we might as well start where we started. That was having difficulties with the strange situation where it seems like Clubhouse actually needs more bandwidth than we thought it needed. More bandwidth than Netflix, which still runs, and Zoom, which is working fine. And me personally, I find that bandwidth thing such a good analogy for attention, focus, and concentration. So, by example, if we're distracted with so many things, our bandwidth, our ability to carry signal rather than noise is impeded. And just like Clubhouse, you can't hear each other, and a conversation can't even continue or go on or start. Yeah. and when things require smaller bandwidth, that's easy. So when we're kind of drained, we could do stuff that doesn't demand so much, but you can't expect to do mentally taxing or cognitively demanding or something that needs a lot of emotional processing. We can't expect to do that stuff when our attention, our concentration, our focus is whittled down by so many distractions. So I just wanted to point out that analogy before we went on. Did that ring any true for you, Amira? That bandwidth thing.
Yeah, and your answers and just the way you show up is just very different. So with devices like phones, we can upgrade our devices, but physically, human beings, I don't know if we can upgrade our hardware and how that would work.
Yeah, well, some people are working on it, some variation of it. Already we have technology for when we have deficits. So they've found a way, by example, to use vibration and other related senses and converting those with the sensory input going via implants, converting those into some form of pseudo vision for people who have been blind for a while or can't see. And that seems to be working. Much in the way as an analogy, how for the attorney at law, the lawyer, Daredevil, has his sight replaced by sound. So there are true, not the marketery biohacking, but there are true biohacking experiments going on to augment and help people, but they're largely in the helping us recover function or gain back function that we don't have or that we've lost phase, not in like technically like advancing our hardware. So in a way it's advancing, but it's more of just regaining who we are and what we're capable of at this point in time. Imaginably, though, in the future we're going to get there. We're already working on a bunch of other things. AI helps us process, and things which help us with our attention. There are small pocket devices and clip devices which remind us when we've lost our focus. There's stuff like exoskeletons, kind of Tony Starkish, that enable us to really augment strength, and those are actually being used in industry now, like the lift stuff, like crates. Yeah, I think eventually we will get there. Our tendency as a species seems to be to overreach, especially when we're spurred by curiosity. Yeah. So, we were at Netflix as productivity, and where are you at with that?
So earlier I was saying that Netflix has like bingeable content. I can watch Attack on Titans and just zone in on Netflix. Like it's not anti-productivity if it is intentional, and that was what we were discussing earlier. So it just seems that productivity, procrastination goes hand in hand with like emotions and managing your emotions and shifting your maybe perception or how you feel about certain things. And can you share more on that?
Definitely. Tell me about that thing you're doing though. When you say that you don't see Netflix as anti-productivity and you somehow see them hand to hand, and
Yes.
you sound like you have an enjoyment about that. I mean, uh, I get it, but also that confuses me. How is Netflix productivity? Unless Netflix is your job, unless you're paid to screen stuff or you're getting creative ideas from Netflix. How's that working out for you? What exactly did you mean there when you say you see Netflix as productive? How's that?
Yeah, I see. Yeah, I see this productive. Well, one, I like the binge-worthy thing where you could just binge content and consume it and still be like in flow and consume that much content still. Like 10 hours of doing a movie marathon or Lord of the Rings or anything that fully captivates and immerses you and just keeps you there and it doesn't feel like you're doing work. But again,
Gotcha. Okay.
it goes back, yeah, it goes back to me being a marketer. So I am a marketer by trade, CMO right now of Ivaniskin and consultant to other marketing clients. And a big
Gotcha.
thing of what I do is strategizing. And for me, Netflix gives me new thought.
Right.
Like
Right.
watching it gives me strategies or just certain elements in, for example, watching Sandman. I can bring that and put that into products or perception building. Like it just for me, it's it's a productive thing.
Right. 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 But. Well, I get it. I get it. And well, that's you. In your case, that's exactly the thing. You have a context for it in which it happens to be useful. And since it's so engrossing and it uses several psyche elements that really get you hooked, well, of course, it makes sense for you. But can you imagine how it is for most people who cannot derive any form of a living or useful creativity applicable to what they're doing to try and eke out a living in this world by watching Netflix? I mean, can you imagine what it's like for people for whom it's completely unrelated?
Well, I am a professional procrastinator, so yes, I'm very good with emotions. I feel things a lot. And for
So,
me, especially in my younger years, like college, it wasn't movies because movies like stimulate me and like wake me up. It's more of distractions. So for me, it was gaming,
okay.
and gaming switches me off to like distractions. And what was the struggle for me, like as a procrastinator or when procrastinating, is I didn't have control. Like it was almost like an avoidance mechanism. Like I know I'm supposed to be studying for college stuff or doing homework or doing certain things, and I'm gaming or
Okay.
just doing anything, like looking at cat videos, like anything except the thing that I'm supposed to be doing. And like I feel helpless and I couldn't do anything about it. Like that was what was happening and going on.
Okay. So I'm confused here. How is it? I get it in your context, but how would it be useful for other people, like
I think
Netflix
it
in
goes
particular?
to, yeah, I think it just goes to emotions and like being intentional. So whether it is gaming, whether it is Netflix, like your ability to do what needs to be done or do what you want to do versus being a slave to your distraction, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. So here's my thesis, though. For you, Netflix happens to be like really productive, rather than kind of like not getting anything done with
Mm,
games. For you, for your current work and the many hats you're currently wearing as a multi-tiered marketer, it makes so much sense for you to be exposed to stuff that simulates like really strong creative juices, like really broadens your experience and touch with the general psyche of so many people. That makes sense. That makes sense. But for most people, though, can you imagine what it's like? I mean, there's absolutely no relation to They're surviving and thriving and watching Netflix. Or is there? I'm curious what your take on that is.
Well, I think a question that people have about like procrastination and like just going life the way that they are doing right now and doing something differently is like why? Like whatever they're doing right now, maybe it's working, and then they have like cycles of when you have like a deadline, and then the deadline is like tomorrow, so you had 2 weeks to do it, and you're doing it overnight. So they've been working in cycles like that. And how do they go from that type of living, and why should they go from that type of living to a different approach and the acceleration? Like, how does that factor in and come into this conversation?
Okay. Let me try to tie a few things together first. So also it makes sense for me and anybody else wants to join in on our conversation. You kind of pointed out earlier that Netflix is productive for you. I saw that as because contextually it's useful for you. You got something out of it. Okay, so there's that element of what it's useful for you for. So one, contextually it's useful. Two, feeling wise it's useful. So you describe a feeling of flow, a feeling of kind of like an emotional freedom, and kind of like a compulsion forward. Okay, the same way we're drawn into episode after episode until you're done with a whole series. So I get that. Contextually it's useful. Okay, but for most people, including the thing you said about cycling, on and off cycles, so that makes sense, and especially in your context. I think for most people, though, the best they can do with Netflix is an analogy. So, by example, even if they can't use Netflix, what elements within Netflix hook us? So there's stuff which pique our curiosity. There's the pacing. There's that emotional factor. There's the reward and the payoff. There's the story setup. So many elements are in place, including cycling. Sure. And my only concern for there is what usually happens is, rather than just an analogy for, okay, I might as well gamify my other tasks and my projects. So I make aspects of my life, which I have to do anyway, as fun and compelling as Netflix and Sandman. But what usually happens for most people is they do a substitution instead. They're doing something which is compelling and drawing and pulling them forward and deeper. That happens to be completely related to the work that they need to do for their life. And they don't see the analogy and they don't see the transfer over. But wait a minute, this naturally compels me forward. This works on me. I might as well reverse engineer it for the rest of my life. So it works and it's fun. And it's gamified and celebratory as an experience and multi-tiered and never boring. That makes sense. But most people never make that transition. There is also, by example, a halfway that I've seen. There's this funny little thing I've run across recently, Amira. I don't know if you've ever heard of Anime Doro.
Yeah.
What's your understanding of that?
I haven't fully watched the series.
No, it's not a series. Is there a series? Oh, crud.
So.
There could be a series. Well, Anime Doro, let me describe. Okay. It started with this one guy on YouTube. Okay, to pace his studies, he would gamify his experience by linking the stuff he had to do with the rewards of getting to watch his favorite anime. So that the way to watch his favorite anime and complete the series is to first complete his tasks. Does that make sense? So instead of a Pomodoro or a timer technique, he would do cycles of work, marked, augmented, paired with cycles of watching anime. So, by example, 3 cycles of 25 minutes of deep work or studying, and 1 episode of anime. Eventually, he would finish countless anime series that way, but In so doing, he finished thrice as much deep work and excelled in university. And it's picked on as a weird subculture movement on YouTube where a few other geeky guys, wait a minute, that makes sense. So they tried it too, and then there are now people anime doroing each other, like let's anime doro together. Like okay, we're pacing and then we're celebrating, we're pacing and then we're celebrating, we're doing deep work alternating with cycles of anime and eventually getting series done in a fun paced way. So that makes sense as like a halfway between Netflix is actually your job, so it's useful, related to you do Netflix and it's productive for you. And then most folks for whom Netflix is fear of missing out, and Netflix is shiny new object, and Netflix is distraction. It's never ending addictive compulsion forward with no rewards. And so I see there's this mean in between where they've managed to use elements of both. Like, I need to get deep work done, and I like this other thing. And so they're using a principle of one of our focus courses, which is that element of play and celebration to reinforce in a very gamified, so to speak, way their necessities and experience of life. how's this sounding so far? Have I managed to tie any of this together for you?
Yeah, I was just looking up Josh Chen. I didn't. This was a different thing than what I was thinking.
Oh, okay.
Yes, so the Animadoro technique. And you did touch on gamifying and making tasks like enjoyable. How does like the course you're going to be teaching tackle that, and does it tackle that?
Yep. Like I said, it's one of the elements, and I actually explained some of that process here. Okay, there are certain immutable, always the same principle level things which are true for all productivity. For if you need to get something done, these are all essential. Quite funnily, well, sleep is part of that, and celebration is part of that, and there are ways to use this, and play is part of that. The things you wouldn't usually expect, like productive, why sleep, why cycle, why celebrate, why play, but they're part of the process. I looked at the best of our current understanding of neuroscience and basic human physiology and proven psychology, and they all correlate. We can't just be in a state of flow all of the time, which is a very common question, by the way. How can I be in a flow state all of the time? And my answer is no. We cycle on, we cycle off, and one enables the other. Deep good sleep enables deep good work. And the course explains and gives examples of those very elements, those principles, and it's a coaching context. So for the first round, and we're doing it live, anyone can ask, like, in my situation this is happening, and the things they can't see because it's their lived experience, I can point out until they, oh, that's what I was doing. And so they catch themselves and gain that insight, that fresh new thought that changes the possibility for their actions. And all they have to do is fit in the action, take it for testing. In project management, we call it an iteration. You see if your idea makes sense, you try out the smallest version of that, you test it and see if that works. Okay. And this is stuff we do within the course itself. Whoa. And we're on.
Yeah, so we were touching on gamifying productivity, and I think we were going to get into the whole Sandman lore and tying that into productivity.
Oh, this I gotta hear.
It's going to be coming from you.
Come on, come on. You're gonna tell me about Sandman and productivity. Come on. I want to hear your take though. Is there? Is there? Do you
I
have?
don't have any take on Sandman and productivity.
Oh,
For
you
me,
don't.
it's romantic.
Oh, okay, 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 okay. Well, it is. It kind of is. It kind of is. You know the lore about it? No, not
No,
yet.
no.
It's very iconic and poetic. The girl's name, funny enough, is I think it was Nada, which is
Oh yeah, I think I saw this episode.
right, and that's metaphoric poetic on so many levels. It's so Dream falls in love with nothing.
Oh, okay.
But it's a very substantial nothing. It's like nothing else. She was from, I think, from the um first sentient beings, like the first race supposedly. So so I guess it's my take then. Productivity and Sandman.
Mm.
Okay. Let's see. Um First off, let's say that there's stuff that Morpheus has delayed because he hasn't had any need to improve on what he's been doing. He's one of the endless, he's one of the first. As soon as anything could be sentient, he already was. Okay. As early as life and death and destiny. So, he hasn't need to change in a very long time. should I should say. You wanted to say something? Because you were gonna.
Yeah, I think just how you're talking, like the importance of time constraints. So like with the endless, they're mortal.
They're immortal.
They can do anything, anytime.
There's no pressure. There's no pressure at all. So, and they're kind of
We're
used.
humans.
And what? Say that again.
We are humans, like us.
Yes, we're human. We're human. We're human. And
Tend to have
since
time.
right. But for Morpheus, he's been living that way for millennia, and nobody's had to tell him to do otherwise. He's always been boss of his own domain. No exposure to anyone or anything else. No real pressure to evolve or change. And I mean, in the job description, it just said endless. It didn't mean timeless. And in fact, Morpheus himself says that he's subject to time. So he can still be one of the endless, but he doesn't have to be timeless in the manner of remaining the same. And in fact, later confronted with what the endless will be a version of mortality, the being unable to do anything. That's kind of the version of the closest you can get to destroying one of the endless is binding them, making them unable to do anything. So, confronted with that and in the light of new events and exposure to other sentient beings, he became aware and was able to consider, by contrast, the possibility that maybe there was a better way of doing things. Even though he's always been boss, even though he's always been right, And in fact, that's our nature as three-dimensional beings, The only way we actually see anything is by contrast of two things. You only know a bad time from a good time, a bad person because you've had a good person. You only know enjoyable because you've had unpleasant. You only know light because of dark. And in fact, there's a phenomenon neurologically and experientially called whitewash, where if you're out in the Alps and skiing and it's all snow and you had the utter insanity of wearing clothes which were just close to white, and if no one else was around with their fluorescent pants and their crazy shades, and all you saw was white, they would go blind. Like literally couldn't see. There was nothing to compare against, to contrast against. So visually, they couldn't see. And it would take some time and exposure to movement and to color before they could start seeing again. But that absence of contrast literally makes us blind. And metaphorically, too. So if there isn't enough contrast between things, if we don't figure out where we are and where we want to go and calibrate along the way, if we don't compare us against ourselves, us against people on the same path, us against people on a different path, if we don't compare and contrast, we can't see anything. And that's a curious thing about the human design. So imagine people who are stuck in comfort, and if there's nothing else, they can't see that they're stuck in a hell, prison of their own making, because it looks comfortable, it looks sane, it looks safe, it looks easy. So much so that this thing they say where you're kind of the sum of 5 people you're exposed to, in a way that lends, if they're all the same, if that lends a kind of blindness. And you see this in cults, they can't see outside of it. They're completely blind to their inanities, their craziness, their silliness. Okay, because that's all that the cult or the tribe says, you know. And Lao Tzu would probably put it as, and I'll paraphrase, wisdom is the ability to hold 2 diametrically opposed ideas in your mind, 2 opposing ideas in your mind without exploding. I paraphrased, of course. Wisdom is that. So part of wisdom is the ability to see, and to see because of 2 different things, and to tolerate those 2 different things because they enable you to see. So it's like, you know, us having this discussion where we're coming from like supposedly different sides, although I've been a master procrastinator myself. Okay, but us just considering this conversation from two different poles, like one trying to come from, you know, focus on productivity, and one trying to explain that procrastination is kind of the way, and me confusingly trying to understand, but not outright rejecting it. So even in that contrast, there's vision, there's sight, there's something productive happening there. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. Contrast being complementary.
Yep. There's that too. This is kind of cover where we wanted to go with this conversation. I wonder if there's any else about Sandman at the moment that strikes you as related to productivity.
I think the enjoyment factor.
Well,
Or the
okay.
entertainment piece.
Okay. Let's take that. How would you separate, if let's pretending you are the usual everyman, okay, common folk, everybody else who isn't in your specific circumstances. Okay, we're all different in some way, but imagine a regular person for whom Netflix isn't productive. How they tie that in, how they manage to make that connection and not be instead trapped. How is Netflix not just distraction? How is Netflix not just FOMO and shiny new object syndrome and the escaping the pain of doing work by being embroiled in something pleasant? That the very same way we're trapped in our comfort zones. How is it not that? What's your take on this?
Yeah, I see it like it could be quicksand. It doesn't have to be Netflix. It could be alcohol, gaming, anything that switches your brain off or switches you off. And I think just the question on getting help, like when do you get help and when do you DIY and just manage.
Okay, what's your take on that? When should people get help? It's not like there's a Netflix anonymous. Hi, I'm Amira. I've been hooked in by Netflix for the past 3 years. There isn't like an anime anonymous that I'm aware of. When should people seek help? When do you think?
Well, for me, if as soon as possible, just that is the importance of mentoring, coaching, so that you get to your goals faster, so that you compress time and are able to do more of what you want versus just running around in circles. And there isn't a Netflix anonymous, there isn't an anime anonymous, but there
You
are
know what? There
people
might
with
be.
broken hopes and dreams,
Yes,
or
yes, yes, yes.
unrealized hopes and dreams.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. That's the thing.
That's so remarkable.
Without any sufficient contrast, we're trapped by our own devices. We're trapped by our own short-sightedness. We're trapped by the very fact that we can't see because we haven't exposed ourselves to contrast. And the world is built heavily on technologies which are designed to distract. It's just so much easier to sell anything to anyone when they have no control over their own will or volition or intentionality. If you encourage people to be easily distractible and requiring of entertainment as a need, there's no place, or less and less place, for for discipline and for the proper balance of hormones which gear us towards thriving and not just falling into the same rut we've always fallen into. Yeah. Is this in any way making sense to you?
Yeah, and I think we covered the topics we were wanting to cover today.
Yep. This was fun.
I'm not sure if Luigi has questions, but he was mentioning Netflix earlier, and I think it was productive for him too.
Ah, okay. Did you want to share anything about that, or did you have any questions while we're here
Questions.
before we wind up?
Not so much.
Mm.
Not so much, but yeah. Things that aren't that people can perceive as not productive. It can be for others. It's really dependent on how they maximize it. So,
I get that.
Yeah.
That. So for me, that falls into one of the things that we talk about in the course, which is the contextuality about of things. There's always a context, and by example, for me, for two people to be arguing about anything, even if it's something that looks completely factual, if you don't take into account the context within which it's happening, the individual contexts from which they're coming from, there's no real discussion, and there's also therefore no real argument. Okay, so I can argue that Netflix isn't productive because Netflix isn't work, and if I'm embroiled in Netflix, I'm losing out on productivity and effectivity and significance in the deep work I could be doing. But if Netflix were part of my research, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. For me to watch something like Atelier, lingerie designers. If I were interested in the business of beautiful lingerie, to watch a series like that on Netflix makes sense. If I were to use Netflix for Anime Doro as a reward system, where if by example I got a certain amount of hours, let's say 1:1, if I finished 30 minutes of deep work on Sunday, I could watch that week's episode of Spy versus Family, Spy Cross Family. How do you actually say that? but this brilliant little anime with the little girl Anya. So contextually, you could find ways to use things, but I think for most people, they're unable to do that because they're just caught in the conditioning of it all. Just the blind entertainment and this thing where you continually have to top the last thing or be different because people have just been conditioned to have virtually no attention spans. And so what do you think we can do about, for the masses of people for whom they don't get the point, they don't get the analogy, and all they have is the addiction? Okay, like for distractions, like
Addiction is a topic of its own. Isn't it?
yeah.
But contextually, anime can be an addiction or not. See, it can be an aid if you're using it for Anime Doro, or an addiction. Again, there's that contextuality.
But what if you like your addiction though? No, genuine question. Not anime, but anything. Like,
Yeah, okay. So there's a physical need Okay, that's a true addiction. And then there's a like a psychological need where it's kind of like being romantic about the notion of romanticism and romance itself. Okay, and these are two different things. Okay, people can be like visually picture like a piece of cake and then be drawn to it, and some people it's a different thing. They like have no control. Like one hit of morphine, and most people can never. One hit of a very strong opiate, heroin, and they're hooked. You know, the number of times it takes to get addicted, one. Okay, and so it's a physical need, it's a physical craving. So these are two different things, and I can imagine they can occur together, but they're not quite just the same thing. But for us to be able to use like a version of being hooked, you know there's even a book by Nir Eyal, productivity guru, super smart scientist, um, on distractibility and on being hooked. Because that is a mechanism. So I guess that's kind of like an invitation we can have for ourselves. How do I hook myself with using the elements of stuff which already hook me, but on stuff which help me and my beloveds, my loved ones thrive, not just survive? And if you can bridge the gap, then you have something truly useful. And you've Netflixed and Sandman gamified your life in a truly useful way. You got thoughts on this or any parting words, Amira, Luigi?
Yeah, nice discussion.
Okay. I think we're kind of good for now. I hope this helps anybody else.
On addiction, and it is its own topic.
Oh yeah, that's a whole other thing. We could talk about that sometime. It's a whole mess of a thing. There's funny enough stuff we know now about addiction that we didn't know before. Have you heard about the rat experiment in the rat park?
No.
Oh, can we go into that real quick?
Yeah, if it's related to productivity.
Oh yeah. Okay. You'd imagine that rats in a rat park, given water versus water with a drug that's addictive, that they would choose the drug, right?
Yeah.
Okay. This was true for small cages, like they used to have a long time ago. But some smart dude created like a park with all the freedom, the liberty, the food, the entertainment that they could possibly need. And what would happen is that the rats could take the water with the drug recreationally once in a while. But more often than not, even if the drug was available, they'd prefer plain water. They didn't need the additional addictive thing. They were already getting a hook out of their life. And I guess in a productivity manner, that's kind of what this conversation was headed into. What if we could make a Morphean, a Sandman goal dream of our lives that's so compelling we take it not just from the dreaming but into our waking world? What if we could gamify our experience so well that our tasks and projects, those two get done until a life we actually can be unaddictively living plays out? I hope that makes some sense and ties these all together. Anything else to share? Hey, before we wrap this up, I guess.
Yeah, really good. And thank you for your time, because there were some questions around the need of productivity and acceleration. So if there are any parting words that you have on why they should join the course and what's about working with you. I know you did touch on it, but just...
Yeah. Thanks. Okay. My thesis is this. The reason that logic and information alone we supposedly know everything that we're supposed to do. The internet has opened up all the answers supposedly to us. It still hasn't made the majority of us functionally productive or useful to ourselves and to our loved ones enough because it's not completely logical. We've missed out the fact that every single time we end up not doing something, or in some version of what I call the inertia sickness, inertial sicknesses, stuckness, stagnation, backsliding, backtracking, quicksanding, being stuck, procrastinating, and going back to patterns we've always had, or slightly improving, but no much more than 1% a year, essentially just the same. Of 80,000 thoughts a day, we're still having like 79,000 thoughts, the same as yesterday, rather than really doing the deep work to go forward. I think we've been stuck, or it looks to me like we've been stuck because we've missed out on the fact that every single time we procrastinate or delay or don't move or move backwards, it's because there's an emotional element that we couldn't see. And precisely because we couldn't see it, we couldn't fight this monster that we couldn't see. We couldn't see it, we couldn't name it, we didn't know how to deal with it. And so we were trying to deal with it logically and trying to listen to people who'd say what to do. But without their experience of life and their understanding, it's just another list that we conveniently ignore. The same way information hasn't made us gods, even though it's freely available now. Information alone does nothing. Without insight or fresh new thought and insightful action that stems from that, it does nothing. Without a rewriting of our beliefs, which enable our skills, and without putting in the actions necessary, information and logic are virtually nothing. Would be nice if it actually did something of its own, but usually it doesn't. And so that's the thesis I start from and move from when I share these tools which enable us to overcome the energies of procrastination. So in a very weird way, Amira, what's your notion of shadow work?
It's its own discussion.
Yeah, what's your notion of shadow work?
Again, it's a long discussion.
Yeah, but what's like a basic what would you say that this thing they call shadow work is like?
Alchemizing the light, alchemizing the dark into light.
Okay. So kind of like a transformation, dark into light, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, in a very weird way, the acceleration method is the most practical shadow work that I'm aware of that exists. I mean, it looks like a productivity course, but it's actually a shadow work course. It looks like a shadow work course, but it's actually a productivity course. And it looks like a productivity course, but it's about having clarity of mind and a better experience of life. Yeah, it's also, strangely enough, an emotional freedom course disguised as a productivity course. A productivity course disguised as an emotional freedom course. And not only an emotional freedom course, but the most powerful emotional freedom course that I know, that I'm aware of, is available. That translates onto the other scales of our life, across the areas of our lives: business, finance, success, health, relationships, the whole kabunga, the whole matrix of it. Does this make any sense?
Yeah, and thank you for your time and
Thank you.
for explaining this.
I think we're pretty good for tonight. Shall we wrap?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good night, everyone. I hope you got something from this, and we'll see you around. Hopefully seeing you at the acceleration method. Cheers, everyone. Thank you, Amira. Thank you, Vijay.